What up, YouTube? It's your homegirl. Need I say more? Yes, I always have more to say. And today, we're having a very complicated conversation. Dun, if I had technology, this would be my intro, right? Dun. Okay. Why do so many Mexicans think they're white? Oh. So, I am a Tejana. I also self-identify as a Frontera, which means that the border literally crossed my family. So, at the time of the treaty, the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, my great grandfather, somewhere back there, we'll call him Popo Jesus. He was maintaining a grant for the Spanish crown, a land grant for the Spanish crown in Hidalgo County. So when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed and the border crossed us, one of the stipulations of the treaty was that ethnic Mexicans that the border had crossed over that were in that area were now to be declared white by treaty. Okay. Now that tells you a lot. First of all, white is not a category that has to do with biology or categorization concern in any scientific categorization, but is rather a category of colonization. Because if whiteness can be granted to you by a treaty, then what is whiteness really? Whiteness is supremacy, right? At least by Anglo culture. And that's what we call it in the area, and that's what I'm going to call it here. Because not all colonizers are the same. And you can hear more about that if you watch my first video in the Why Are Podcast Bros Anti-Hispanic. There's a series 1 and 2. You'll find it in my history. But to be a woman in these different cultures was very different. And you can find that there too in that series. I'll put a link. But this was the fast forward a little bit, and this is the time of my Popo Jesus, okay? And he's maintaining this land grant, and this is around 1918. And this is a time in Mexico in South Texas that's known as La Matanza, or the massacre. And so in this area, 1910 to 1920, what was known as the Great Gatsby era for, like, say, the Northeast, for Anglo culture. For us, it was a time of the massacre. And it was a time when we had rights by the treaty, but they were giving us a very, very hard time about it. And there were lynchings. And this happened to my Popo Jesus and his son-in-law, Antonio Longoria. Okay? And a friend of theirs. And the saying in the day was, you don't buy from the husband, you buy from the widow. And his wife, Epic Menyabasan, managed to hold on to the land because the women of the family that were left over, her and Antonia, she married a guy named Antonio. So her and her daughter Antonia managed to hold on to the land, and what property they had, they might have sold off some here and there, but they held on to it by adopting a code of silence, which hurts me very bad when I think about it, because that means that these women went to their graves never knowing justice for their husbands, never knowing if justice would ever be found. And you can find all this in a book called The Injustice Never Leaves You by Monica Munoz Martinez. So they were murdered by the Texas Rangers because they had gone to town to report a robbery. Because in the day, if you were an ethnic Mexican and you were a victim of a crime by other Mexicans, if you didn't report it, they would see that you were helping them. and you would be in trouble for that. So they rode to town on horseback to report it, and on the way back, 2 off-duty Texas Rangers and a friend of theirs got into a Model T and shot my family in the back. And the guy who was in charge at the time, I forget his name, he was in charge of the Texas Rangers, who I believe at the time were stationed on King Ranch. He said that nobody better move those bodies. So if you look on Google Earth, you can still find the Basan Family Cemetery, and that's the spot where this happened. If you look, it's in South Texas. And this brings me back to a video by the YV_edit. She came out with one that was called "The Price of Whiteness is Compliance," and my family history is a testament to that truth. Because according to the treaty, ethnic Mexicans, Hispanic, Chicanos, Mexicans of American descent were supposed to be considered white. And in the 70s, which is weird, but then in the 70s, like right around the time I was born, they started marking us as white on our birth certificate. So on my birth certificate, it says I'm Caucasian. So why do Mexicans think we're white? Well, because we are, by treaty. But whiteness is a false construct. It doesn't mean anything. And so the price of whiteness isn't just compliance. It's also what you choose. And one of the reasons that I left South Texas, it became very difficult for me while George Floyd, the protests were happening, was because I started to see just how racist some of my own people could be, even some people in my own family. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand a lot of this until I left South Texas, but this goes further into the subject. So fast forward, okay? Fast forward to the 1950s. I have an aunt. It was probably like elementary school. And she's going to a Catholic school in the Coastal Bend area. Okay, this is my mom's side of the family. And it's recorded in her record that she had a speech impediment. But she never remembers having an impediment. And the truth is, on my mom's side of the family, their first language is Spanish. My grandmother and my grandfather both spoke Spanish better than English. Right? And so what we suspect is that this Catholic school that my tia went to wrote that she had a speech impediment because her first language was Spanish. This is what they used to call ESL people. They had a speech impediment, at least in the Coastal Bend. So then I go to high school. And in high school, it's weird, but it's like, you know what's cool and what's not? We see it on TikTok. Well, back in my day, this would have been like 1985-ish. What defined what was cool and what wasn't was not as sophisticated. And we never called it racism, but it was always just seen as sort of unsophisticated or uncool, even with my peers, to be too Mexican. And I remember being raised in that and so gaslit by it that I tried to be less Mexican for a long time. In high school. This is just when you're trying to be cool. And I went to, also I went to high school in an area of white flight. So I was raised from my high school years, the getting cool years, in a poor white neighborhood. And it was very white. I don't mean dancing like Carlton white. I mean white like having weird meetings in the woods white. Right? And so then fast forward and I'm going to the local community college. I'm going to Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, Texas. Yes, because I will say this and drop your name. We had ESL, English for Spanish language speakers, to teach people how to acclimate here. But every time I tried to take Spanish 1, because growing up in a white neighborhood and being mixed race, as Tejanos are, and I'll unpack that in a minute, I didn't know Spanish, or I have what I call a coconut Spanish. And so I always wanted to take Spanish 1, and they never had it. They never had it. And then, see, I have liberal arts associates with a focus on geology. And there was an old boys, this would be like 2014, there was an old boys club there, right? There was one teacher, a geology teacher, tenured, old boys club, didn't believe in climate change, said the big problem was a massive volcano under Washington State, right? But he had tenure, so there's nothing they could do about him using his academic platform to push this junk science, especially because in that area we're very ingrained with the oil and gas industry. That's very relevant. And so one of my first introductory classes to geology, this would be around 2014, in geology at Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, Texas. They taught us about the 3 different types of skulls. Human skulls. In 2014. That's phrenology. And I had the one teacher that was younger and female, and she was very uncomfortable, but she said she was forced by the state to teach it. And so she taught, there's this skull, and that skull, and that's all we're going to talk about it. And she pushed it away, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand phrenology back then, or what it was. The whole thing about critical race theory, it's about it's about phrenology and what it did, and that science is highly based on racism, or its beginnings. Yes, and I can unpack science in a different direction, but I am an atheist and a skeptic and a scientific thinker. But that's different. That's later. That's another video. And so all of these little subtle ways, they're trying to alienate us from our Mexicanness. On my birth certificate, it says I'm white. According to the treaty, it says we're white. That's why so many Mexicans think we're white, because we are. But what we are also is very akin to like the Appalachians. Because the Appalachians, you know where they talk about America's great melting pot? This is also what you learn in critical race theory too. There were some melting pots that happened, and there's some whiteness in there. But for some reason, they were rejected from the greater vision of the melting pot because there wasn't enough whiteness, like the Appalachians and like the Tejanos. We are a colonized, integrated people. The great melting pot happened with us before it did with when people were coming. We were already integrated. We had already a lot of indigenous, and we had a lot of black in us. There was a time in New Spain which Cortez came across Tenochtitlan, then he colonized it and put New Spain on top of it, and now that's Mexico City. There was a time in New Spain there were more self-emancipated people from the African diaspora than there were Spaniards or Peninsulados. This is mestizaje. This is the caste system. So what we know, though, in the area is that we may be called white, but we're not white like how they treat us. And so we are a biracial integrated people. And Kamala Harris is a biracial integrated woman. And I'm voting for her. And people try to be white because they tell you you are. But at the end of the day, when you walk into certain places, you don't get treated like you are. So you aren't only what you came from, you're also what you choose.